We are kicking off a new series. We're calling it B-Side. Now, if you're under 40, I have to explain what this means. Way back in the Fred Flintstone days when you had a baby pterodactyl playing these little spinny things. It's like a CD, but it was called an album. It's called a 45, but it wasn't a pistol. And a group would release one song. On the A side would be their hit, and you'd play it over and over and over again. You were the auto remote control. But on the flip side, the B side, that was another song, lesser known because they had to fill it with something, and so that was just the B-side. So we're looking at Scripture. There's kind of the big stories that, regardless of how intimate you might be with church or God or the stories, there's some big stories that stand out, and that's what we tend to gravitate toward because they preach well, they're easy, whatever. But all of God's Word's given for a purpose, and there's history, there's background, there's fleshing out the same broken world in which we live and how we can navigate. And so we're going to be looking at some more obscure, overlooked scriptures, just and what we can learn from that. And so we're just sort of a wild ride over the first part of the summer and engaging. And so we're going to be in 2 Samuel 4, mostly 2 Samuel 9, if you want to go there. We're looking at Mephibosheth. Can you say that with me? Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth. Dun, 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 dun. Mephibosheth. Dun, 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 dun. Mephibosheth. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, you'll remember it now. You're welcome. All right. So, jumping in 1964, there's a psychologist named Robert Rosenthal, and he went into the San Francisco Unified School District. The whole city is a county, and the whole county is one school district, and it's one of the most diverse, we had our kids in this, it's true. It's one of the most diverse school districts still in America, from socioeconomic to ethnic, to educational basis, to religious, to every diversity you could imagine is there. And so he went into this whole school system, and he said, I want to give an IQ test to all the students. But it's not an IQ test, it's a predictive test on which students are really just, their IQ is going to blossom, they're going to go exponential, and they're just going to come into their own and just light it up, and which kids are going to beep, and so to help teachers know how to engage, and that's all he said. Well, he gave a standard IQ test, ripped the front page off, stuck another one on there, and he called it the Harvard Test for Inflective Intelligence or something. He just made up, it was used like word salad from a dictionary. Inflected acquisition. And so he said, this is the test. Gave it to all the students. All the different classes took the test. He took all the tests, put them in a nice, neat pile, and threw them away. And then he went down the list of the students, and he's just rolling dice or flipping coins, and he randomly selected a bunch of students. Went back and told the teachers, these students have been identified as having this inflective adaptability, acquisition, intelligence thing, and they're going to be the ones that bloom, and all of that went away. Came back a year later, tested the students. Came back the next year, tested the students. Next year, and there's a whole longitudinal study. Guess what was found? The students that were randomly selected to be these amazing, just on the cusp of genius, their IQs objectively went up every single year as opposed to everyone else. And in further studies that were done, it was showing that all the million points of contact and interaction and disposition of the teacher toward the student had changed overnight. That they'd seen the students as, wow, this isn't a problem, this isn't a pain, this isn't I'm running out of slips to send her to the principal, this is a curious Einstein that really needs more encouragement and patience and engagement. But what was really operating was these students now saw themselves completely differently based on what was being mirrored through the teachers. And it resulted in actually, objectively, their IQ going up. Undeserved favor gives us a better vision or a better version of ourselves. You guys familiar with the story of Les Mis? Les Miserables. So Jean Valjean gets out of prison. He's the main character. He goes back to his old ways, robs this monastery of silver. He gets caught. He's going to go right back to the prison the rest of his life. And the priest steps in and lies and says, oh, no, I gave him the silver. You forgot the candelabra. Totally gave him grace, totally gave him a new vision or a new mirror through which to see himself, not the broken one he was accustomed his whole life, and that changed the entire trajectory of his life. That's what we're going to be looking at with the story of Mephibosheth. Now, the context of this is it's just ending badly with Saul. So the end of 1 Samuel, about chapter 31, records the death of Saul. Now, this is the king that everybody wanted. This is the king that people said, all the other nations have kings. Why don't we have a king? All the other nations go to war. Why don't we go to war? All the other nations are conquering. Why can't we conquer? That guy, literally head and shoulders above the rest, super buff, super charismatic, super beautiful. I mean, he was just this guy, this model MMA fighter, busting it up. And because they wanted a king to go up before the armies to kick butt like everyone else. We want to be like all the other nations. And God's warning him, saying, man, if you want to go that way, my plan was to get there eventually with a different kind of king. But if you want a king like everyone else, then you're going to suffer like everyone else, because the king's going to mess it up like everyone else. No, it's cool. So we have the whole story of Saul, half heart, he would comply, but he always got impatient. He took matters into his own hands. And there's consequences for all of those. So we wind up now with a Philistine army closing in. All his sons are getting killed. Archers are just shooting in. I kind of imagine that scene in Platoon where he's just there, kind of, another arrow, and he's going down, and he watches all his sons get killed. It's his youngest Jonathan and his armor bearer. He asks his armor bearer to kill him because he doesn't want to be captured and tortured. Armor bearer says, no can do. So they all fall on their swords and commit suicide. And it's just this terrible ending to this tragedy, and the wheels coming off, and it's just going down. And so the Philistines come, they decapitate all the heads, or all the bodies, take the heads off. They strip them down to shame them, and they impale them to the city wall. And it's like, look at Yahweh's people. Our God beat their God, my dad can beat up your dad, kind of thing, and we're going to shame the king. Well, the residents said, oh, this is terrible. We can't. This is going to bring a curse on the land. They march all night. They pull the bodies off the wall. They bury them properly, and then the word goes out. The king is dead. The Philistines are coming. Now, when the slaves of God from Egypt came out, and it's the story of our lives, right? We're enslaved. We're brought to a place of dependency so we could learn to worship. Okay, that's kind of what God does with all this, what he was doing with them. The Philistines, when you think of Philistine, what do you hear? Yeah, somebody who's just super low, that doesn't have much culture, doesn't appreciate. The Philistines had all the art. They had all the sex, they had all the drugs, all the rock and roll, they had the technology, they had the greatest streaming service, and they're still doing dial-up in Egypt. And it was all these cool things that kept attracting them to the Philistine gods. Wow, we could trust this knucklehead that wanders us around in a desert for 40 years, or we could get all the bling right now if we just bow down to these gods, do it in our own strength. And so that was the snare. Well, the Philistines weren't called Philistines because they weren't, high culture. It was because they pull stuff like this, and they just had no fear of other gods, and they would disrespect people, and they would just do the most terrible, base things. And so panic ensues as the Philistines are coming, and everyone's frantically trying to flee an invading army. And this is where we jump into the story. First point, we are Mephibosheth in that we are more broken than we realize. 2 Samuel 4:4. Most verses put this in parentheses because it really is a sidebar in the Hebrew. Jonathan, son of Saul, had a son who was lame in both feet. He was 5 years old when the news about Saul and Jonathan came from Jezreel. His nurse picked him up and fled, but as she hurried to leave, he fell and became disabled. His name was Mephibosheth. Now, this is a sidebar tidying up of events. All the descendants of the former king who messed up are dead. Oh, yeah, wait, there's this one guy, Mephibosheth, but he got jacked up, so, okay, well, I guess we're done with that family. Moving on to David. And that's really where the story picks up. Now, just in that short little recounting of his name, what happened to him, and where he's going, there's an awful lot of information that's conveyed on Mephibosheth, and it all has to do with shame. Shame, shame, shame. The name he bore, the shame of Saul. That the Benjamite was the smallest tribe, and that's where Saul is from. And they're almost wiped out twice with these civil wars and genocides and stuff, and they survived. King Saul, brought the glory back to the Benjamites. Everyone's walking around a little more puffed up. Yeah, I'm a Benjamite, just like our king. Well, when he died, nobody wanted to be a Benjamite. It'd take 1,000 years before Paul could say, hey, I'm from the tribe of Benjamin, and I'm a true Jew. Nobody would have said that beforehand because the shame was so palpable. People are still in a hurt locker. The whole country's jacked up. God did this. Saul did this. What do we believe anymore? And so anyone associated with him, it was shameful. The name Mephibosheth, when he was young, they called him, it works in the Hebrew, Meribal, and that means the one who contends against the god Baal. Baal means master, and that's the Canaanite deity. That's what the Philistines worshipped. It was this kind of fertility sex god, if you will, but it was the master that required all of this, and they always needed more sacrifices with it. And so Saul had been fighting against the Philistines in the name of God. He knew that Jonathan would be doing the same. So Jonathan gave his own son the name, I'm going to call him Meribaal, the one who ultimately contends. Like, we recognize the spiritual battle behind this, and so the grandson's going to mop it up, and he'll finally achieve what grandpa and dad have been doing in contending against Baal. Well, there's a slight play on words in Hebrew, where as he grew older, instead of calling him Meribaal, they called him Mephibosheth, or Mephibosheth, and that means the end of all shame. And so they're saying, not only is he going to fight against Baal, fight against the Philistines, put an end to all of our enemies, but it will be the end of shame for the kingdom, because he's going to accomplish more than his dad or granddad did. And so there's a lot of hope in this name, the end of all shame. And all that changed when he was 5 and his nurse dropped him in the middle of the night in a dead panic, and he was crippled. Now, he was precluded now, being crippled, he was precluded from worship. He could not. He was an impure in according to the law. And so now he's an outsider. Hey, did God say anything to us? Did he not? Did you worship? It was only a vicarious relationship. Everyone looked down and pitied him. And every time he heard his own name, it twisted the knife. The end of shame. All I know is shame. I'm marinating in shame. God has clearly judged me. God's judged my family. And now the name that was supposed to be a glorious name that I could ride into, I'm going to be the one that ends shame. All the shame is on me now. And so every time he heard his name, he just wince. I didn't live up to it. I couldn't do it. Something happened. Somebody wrote me a different script. And he's unable to contribute. The ancient world's not ADA compatible. And so really all these other people had to care. He was a liability. And the biggest liability was that he was the last surviving heir of the legitimate regime. You see, the next king had to come from the tribe of Benjamin. That's how royalty works. Primogeniture goes through the firstborn son of every generation. David's from the tribe of Judah, as we know. That's not a legitimate tribe according to how they did kings. And so any army, any faction, any courtier looking for power, all they had to do was find the last living heir, and then they could legitimize a bid to get rid of David. And so as long as that Mephibosheth was alive, David's reign was actually in jeopardy. So he was hiding, he was afraid, he was ashamed, he was broken, he was excluded. And none of this because of himself, everything because of circumstances, but that's the only way he saw himself. Fear of being found out, fear of being discovered, and maybe even a greater fear of people knowing who he really is. We are Mephibosheth, and that we all have shame. Okay, guilt is the recognition that we've done something that's wrong. Shame is the feeling that we in and of ourselves are somehow fundamentally flawed. There's something broken within us. We are not right. The last verse we read about when everything was perfect between God's creation and God, the man and the woman were naked and not ashamed. No barriers, no hindrances, no fear, nothing to hide whatsoever. Literally nothing to hide. And the very first thing, what do they do when they decided, I'm going to take the role of God upon myself? It was a sense of, I've got to hide, I've got to cover. There was fear, there was shame, and the whole thing went sideways. And that's the world into which we're born. These are the bodies and the minds and the souls into which we're born. And this is the world that traffics in this of, you're not worthy, you have to earn, you have to make up, you have to prove, you have to atone, you have to keep measuring up. So all of us have this shame, this sense of fundamentally flawed. None of us are the person that we want to be, right? That's absolutely true for every person on this planet. The script changer is Christ. That is absolutely true, but God didn't leave us there. But God has invited us in. But God changes everything. And so where we traffic with all humanity is we have shame. And we have guilt. We know what we've done. We know that God knows what we've done. Others may not. What we think, what we feel, how we react. The shadow life that can be familiar and that we can subconsciously inhabit and not even realize, versus the I'm fine on Sundays. And we do both, and there's a place for that. But we have guilt. We know what others don't, and if others found that out, they'd run away from us. They'd reject us so quickly, so we got to invest in keeping it under wraps or justifying. And then we all have brokenness. We all are broken in different places. We have childhood wounds, we have trauma, we have loss, we have grief. The longer we live, the more we're saying goodbye to people that matter to us, the more we're hurt by people that matter to us and people that don't. And so the brokenness continues. We're Mephibosheth. Second point. we are also more loved than we could ever imagine. And so there's a period of a few decades that goes on here, and we're familiar with David and his band of merry men. No, it's Robin Hood, and his violent warriors, and they're going through the land and they're doing stuff. And we know those stories, a couple decades. And then there's this, it kind of moves to another place, and we find this in 2 Samuel 9. So after David had kind of stabilized the kingdom, he'd mourned Jonathan and Saul, he'd put things aright, and he's asking, man, there's got to be something more. Verse 3, the king asked, King David, is there still no one alive from the house of Saul to whom I can show God's kindness? Okay, think of King Herod. Anyone alive that could be a king that could usurp, that was a threat, it was a liability. Herod's spirit, which is the spirit of the world, is, how does it affect me? And I got to get rid of the threat. And so that he just slaughtered all these kids trying to get rid of Jesus. David's response, now still in a good place with God, is there anyone of this regime that would be a total liability for me whom I can show God's kindness? I can respond not as the world, not as my inclination, not as my own self-interest, but I can be a channel of God's love. Ziba answered the king, there is still a son of Jonathan. He is lame in both feet. That's what he's known by. He's a cripple. He's an outcast. He's ritually unclean. He's one of those pity party things on the outside, sidebar. Yeah, I guess he's the only one, but yeah, Jonathan the ashamed. Where is he, the king asked. Ziba answered, he's at the house of Machir, son of Amiel, in Lodabar. So the king had him brought from Lodabar to the house of Machir, son of Amiel. Now, Lodabar literally means nothing. It means nothing, okay? And so the place was so insignificant. The place was such a backwater. The place offered nothing. Even the locals called it nothing. Where do you live? Nowhere. You can see that. It may not be the middle of nowhere, but you can see it from here. No, this is literally nowhere. Not even the middle of it. Now, he was royalty. He was the last legitimate descendant of a royal household. He should have all the lands of Saul. He should have all the servants. They should be working the land. He should be negotiating in the government, all that, irrespective of anything else. But he's so broken, he's so fearful, and everyone around him had so shamed him, he is hiding in a place called nothing with a family member completely giving up everything that would have been his. He's afraid. He's keeping a low profile, and now his worst fear happens. He's called by the king to the palace. Completely different world. And he's terrified. Verse 6, when Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David, he bowed down to pay him honor. David said, Mephibosheth, at your service, he replied. Don't be afraid, David said to him, for I will surely show you kindness. For the sake of your father Jonathan, I will restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. Okay, so three things are happening here. First thing, he flips around. You have legitimate fears of being judged, of being hurt, of the liability, of the markers being called in, of people seeing you as you really are. A lot of people I talk to, they're afraid that if they do any transaction with God, they've got to release all their secrets to him. Guess what? There's no secrets with God. There's none. I mean, isn't it crazy thinking? Because we're so used to doing that with one another, we just assume that's the way it is with God. I don't even want to give God just not even a pinky to work with. I don't even want to give God a maybe, because then I'm going to have to deal with all this stuff. Well, guess what? He already knows. That's not really the issue here. But he says, do not be afraid. I'm not going to react as the world does. Your fears are unfounded because you don't see my heart. So first thing he says, fear not. Second thing he says, I'm going to restore. I'm going to restore how you were originally intended, how you were originally made. We were made to rule with Christ. We were made to engage the world in the best way possible. We were made to resonate the love of God and engage that. And we have eternity in the eternal state. What God's doing now is redeeming this, kind of basic instructions before leaving earth, kind of this in-between training time. But he says, I'm going to restore you to your original intent, original purpose, and engagement. And then he said, I'm going to identify with, wait a minute. Mephibosheth's being identified with David. David's not the other way around. Well, when he says you will eat at my table, what he means is your family. It means you're intimate. My valiant men, my counselors, my stewards, and my immediate family, they're the only ones that are going to eat at my table. They're going to see the personal side of me. I'm going to see the personal side of them. We're going to do life on a much closer basis than with anyone else, and you are invited right at the table just like any of my kids. But in doing so, the people that the king surrounds himself with are the people that the king is identified with. So earlier, with all the exploits of David, it said David and his valiant men, David and his warriors, David and these are some bad dudes. I mean, they're just like serious, Rambo, taking care of business. And so everyone's like, oh yeah, the studs and David, and they're all together, and they're the heroes. This is a heroic thing. And David was accustomed to be associated like that. It wasn't cool for Saul to be associated with David because the people loved David more. It was cool for David to be associated with these butt kickers, but now David's choosing to be associated with Mr. Shame, Mr. Cripple, Mr. Judged by God. See, there's this beautiful verse in the New Testament when people were questioning whether God is near or how they have to earn it better or try harder. And it said, and God was not ashamed to be called their God. This is Hebrews 11. They were able to see beyond their pain, their limitations, the judgments of others. They were able to see beyond their own failures, to see God as he is. And what is most liberating, and despite my mess, despite my failures, God is not ashamed to be associated with me, to bear my name. All the way to the cross, all the way to eternal punishment. Everything that I deserved being taken out of the way, put on him at a cost more than I could ever imagine. And he said that was a deal the best I ever got. And that's what's being played out here with Mephibosheth, who had literally nothing to offer other than liability and danger. And God said, man, I see something so different, and I want you to see it. Verse 8, Mephibosheth bowed down and said, what is your servant that you should notice a dead dog like me? Now, doggos, as we know doggos, are the greatest example of God in this world, right? Because it's unconditional love. You can be the biggest wad ever, the greatest tool. You can be the most spiteful, petty, selfish narcissist ever, that you burn through every relationship. And doggy's going to love you. Doggy's just going to love you. He's going to love you. And because it's unconditional love. Okay, that's when we... In the ancient world and in much of the third world today, these are not doggos that we're talking about. Dogs were hated more than the hated enemy. Dogs are kicked whenever they're seen. Rocks are thrown at them. I've been to a lot of places where that's just the standard. I'm like, oh, cute little doggy, and they're snarling because they're beaten their whole life. They're scavenging, and they're only used for security and nothing else. Chained in a house, that's the burglar alarm, but they're kept mean. And that's what Mephibosheth is saying, that a dead dog like me, somebody who has just been kicked and beaten and scorned his whole life, what would the king possibly see in me? See, although he was actually royalty, although he actually deserved all this other stuff, he could not but see himself as this broken, dead dog that was a liability because he believed what everyone had told him. He could see his own inability and couldn't see beyond that. And that's where the story changes. There's this verse in where Paul's writing to the churches, a number of them that he planted in what's now Turkey, Asia Minor. And in Ephesians 3, he says, I pray that y'all discovering Christ, y'all dancing with him, y'all wrestling with him, whatever it might be. I pray that you would discover the fullness, all the dimensions of God's love. And he goes height and width and breadth and depth, and it's an extra dimension. I'm not sure. I think maybe he's a time traveler. But he's just saying every way you could possibly know God's love, I pray you would discover it. But he prefaced that just before by saying, as Christ dwells in your heart. But there's two different words in Greek for dwell. There's somebody residing somewhere. Hey, I'm renting here. I'm in this trailer. I'm camping out. And it's like a category. Like, okay, I'm a Christian. I downloaded the Holy Spirit. I can fly a helicopter now. It's Matrix. I download the Holy Spirit. I'm holy now. Now I'm in the right category and I'm safe and I'm here and God loves me. So Christ dwells in my heart because I said the magic prayer at Bible camp and now I'm a Christian and it's just a fact. That's not at all what Paul is saying. He uses the word not to dwell, that Christ just is in you as the Spirit's been given to you, but that Christ would make himself at home. Christ would rearrange the furniture of your life, rearrange the artwork decorating the walls of your life. See, we just cover over all this disparate stuff and we're hiding stains and marks and burn mark on the carpet and moving furniture to cover stuff up. And our lives are a mess. And Christ comes in intimately and he makes our life a place where he would be comfortable dwelling. Not that he has to, not ontologically he belongs, in us because of confession, but that he's making himself at home. So in the context of intimacy, in the context of being known, in the context of doing life, that's how we discover the full depth of Christ's love because we have to deal with our own lack of self-love, right? And so in the same way, Mephibosheth in intimacy with David at the table, hooking and jabbing with the king's kids, he's going to discover a very new reality. As David makes this comfortable, he's going to be comfortable. Third point. We've been offered a new identity, like Mephibosheth, from a great king. 2 Samuel 9:9. Then the king summoned Ziba, Saul's steward, and said to him, I've given your master's grandson everything that belonged to Saul and his family. You and your sons and your servants are to farm the land for him and bring in the crops so that your master's grandson may be provided for. And Mephibosheth, grandson of your master, will always eat at my table. Now Ziba had 15 sons, that's 15 families, so we're already at about 50 people, and 20 servants. Each of them possibly with their own helpers. Then Ziba said to the king, your servant will do whatever my lord the king commands his servant to do. So Mephibosheth ate at the king's table like one of the king's sons. Now this is a serious operation. All of these people, possibly 100 people-ish, that are all working on behalf of the working the lands, the royal lands of Saul, so that Mephibosheth can be royalty. Everybody who's royalty has these stewards that work their land, and they get it's a feudal system quasi, so they get the proceeds in that. And so it wasn't just that he made a pronouncement, and I'm going to pretend that you're like one of my kids, and you're like a pet at the table, and you're welcome, and you can eat at the table, but all of us are doing the royal thing, and you're not. Okay, beyond just a pronouncement, beyond a one-time deal or a declaration, or I see you, and can you see yourself that way, he made it so. He actually transferred all of this and made him just like all the other royalty, even though it came at great cost. Even though Mephibosheth literally had nothing he could offer him other than a liability. And he's a greater liability now. The one person that can bring down this king that a lot more people are now going to be disgruntled with is now a spotlight on him. He's at the palace. How do we get the legit heir and throw David? David's made it easy for us. He said, hey, it's Mephibosheth. He's right here. Just come and get him and kill me. And so now he's a double liability. And I think so often that's how we see ourselves, or at least I'll just own it. That's how I see myself with God. Like either stepping into the kingdom and God, what's wrong with you? I've got nothing to offer, and that's absolutely true. But beyond that, you've seen my track record. I'll take the easiest things and mess them up. I'll take some beautiful things and make them so ugly and terrible. And I don't even have to try. When I try, it really gets weird. Why would you want me on your team other than you must be betting against the other team you're going to cash out at the end? The fix is in. When we were putting up wallpaper, and I think our oldest daughter, Katya, was 2, and she wanted to help. And so we had these huge ceilings, and it just brewed up all this, we had to brew it up, it's a long story, different context, all this glue. And we had a big bucket and a mop, and so we're swabbing it on the walls with this and then putting up the wallpaper. Well, the only time our daughter had ever seen us with a bucket and a mop is when we're doing the floors. So she wanted to help. So we're in another room doing wallpaper, and she just and gets this glue out with a mop and all the way down the hallway, just swabs, empties the whole thing, covers the entire hallway in glue. And then she realized what she did, and she ran through it. Well, I could find her. I just followed the gluey footprints to under her bed. And, okay, Katya, it's cool. Come on out. Let's talk. That's the perfect example of God in us. Hey, God, I got this. I can help you. Totally mess it up. I mean, he was quite fine putting the wallpaper on without us. And then it's like running and hiding. Fear. Ah! Here I am, God, on your team, helping. And it's this thing, we have nothing we're bringing to the table in and of ourselves that we can see. And certainly we're not able to see it because people telling us the opposite the whole time. But what God says unmistakably in the gospel, what God says unmistakably through the story of Mephibosheth and all of our lives is, we don't have to earn this. We can't earn this. We don't have to maintain this. It's not some utility that God gets in having so he can use us. God delights in us. God, beyond supernovas and every amazing animal and whatnot in the universe, we're the only ones that are his image bearer. He's fallen in love with us. He cares for us. We move his heart unlike anything else. The angels, perfect in his presence, when they sinned, they only got judgment. Frail, smelly, awkward, inconsistent. The only thing we're consistent in is failing. So I guess we're consistent. But consistency is only a virtue if you're not a screw-up. So maybe that's not a virtue. This is us. And what do we get when we mess up? Time and again, a Savior. God's intimacy, an invitation to the King's table. Nothing we can do. We can't make it right. We can't self-atone. We can't backfill. We can just receive in humility. Dead dogs like us, believing the lies from the world, marinating in our own brokenness and shame. and we get a seat at the table. You are the king's kids, not just a pronouncement, not just a name badge, but everything that goes with it, all at once given. And in the context of intimacy, getting to understand truly, not just as a concept or an abstract or a Hallmark card, but we get to understand with all the saints contending with God, what are the full dimensions of his love, because we've got to understand that he loves us first. And that can be the hardest. That is the gospel in a nutshell. We have hurt God, we are broken, we went our own way, we cut off our lifeline. We have jacked up our lives and every life that touches it, and vice versa. And there's consequences for that, and because of God's love, but God not wanting to leave us there, but God not just wanting cold, hard justice, but God stepping into our mess, not crumpling it up and starting over, entering in, taking upon himself all of our sins, all of our all of our guilt, all of our shame, all of our brokenness, at a cost we would never, ever be able to understand. That now we can sit at the king's table, we can have intimacy, and God is not ashamed to be called our God. Final point. Our new identity changes how we relate to God, ourselves, and others. Okay, I'm guessing most people probably aren't too familiar, unless you did the guilt read through the Bible in a year thing. Anyone do that? It's awesome. I've never been able to do that. I'm a Bible scholar, and I get stuck in numbers. I'm just like putting in snooze. I'm like, God. Then Leviticus. Oh, God. Now, there's some awesome stuff there, but seriously, that's some hard sledding. So kudos if you read through the Bible, even if it was guilt-ridden. I'm kidding. Driven. But you're probably not going to remember 2 Samuel because David is awesome. It's King David. Okay, yeah, David, there was that thing with Bathsheba and Uriah and adultery and murder. That's not cool. That's not cool. But then we got Psalm 51 out of it, and David's back on the horse, and we're all good in the kingdom, and God's glory, and all the typology with Christ, and isn't that super? Yeah, most people, if you've ever preached on Mephibosheth, you end the story right. He's sitting at the table. It's one of the king's kids. It's the greatest rendering of the gospel. Watch and go and do likewise. Peace. And it preaches well, and it ends. But that's not the actual end of the story, and we need to preach the whole story. Okay, where it gets weird is that the wheels start coming off hard with David. The kingdom is in a mess. There's this downward death spiral. It's like the plane's caught on fire and burning bodies are jumping out, and it's chaos and pandemonium, and David's asleep at the wheel. It's just terrible stuff. There's consequences for actions. And throughout this, the subtext is, but God is still faithful, but God is still merciful, but God is still redeeming, but God still is working this through. God still loves David, even though he's a tool. But David turns hard, and it wasn't just him, I want this, and raping Bathsheba and killing her husband, who happened to be his best friend and bodyguard. That was pretty dark. But then he got over that. He repented. He engaged. How could I do this? And was called out, and it's really good until it got really bad. So one of David's sons rapes his daughter, one of his daughters, and David does nothing. And it creates a lot of pain and a lot of damage and a lot of destruction. Another one of his sons goes in and has sex with all of David's wives, shames David, creates a civil war and a rebellion. David has to flee into the wilderness, just like he did with Saul. Now he's doing it with his other son, Absalom. And he only cares about Absalom so much that his general, Joab, it's Joab, but I think Jobab's a funnier name. And he picks him up and says, come on, man, get it together. He's dead, Jim. And it's like, dude, seriously, you're just so focused on this. All the people that have risked their lives for you are going to rebel tonight if you don't fix this now. You're not being a king. You're not even being a good dad. You're never a good dad. You used to be a good king, and now the whole thing's going to crap. Fix it. He enslaves an entire people group, the Ammonites. This would be Jordan area. He enslaves all these villages, super hard, back-breaking labor, men, women, and children, because he needs more weapons to go to war. He spites Michal. So Michal's one of his wives. She's the one that mocked him when he was dancing, all his might. It wasn't naked. He just took off his outer robe. I thought it would have been cool if he was naked, but that's not the translation. Anyway, he's dancing before the Lord, and she rebukes him. You've shamed yourself. And so she's barren after that, and she's sent out. Well, she remarries, and she's been married for about a decade, and David just decides, oh yeah, Michal, she hasn't suffered enough, takes her, puts him on his horse, rides her back to the palace. The husband, the entire length of the journey, is begging, please, my master, please give me my wife, please, I love her so much, please, 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 please. And he just throws her, does a Shrek, throws her in the middle tower, the highest tower, and locks her away for the rest of her life till she dies, just to spite her husband and her, because he can. He's just being hard. totally merciless. He swears an oath not to harm this guy Shimei. So Absalom has rebelled, he's fleeing, and this guy Shimei is just this punk, and he's throwing rocks and mud at the king and saying, you're a tool, you're an idiot, God has judged you. And so Jobab, said, I'm going to split him right down the middle. Do you want him this way or do you want him this way? And David said, no. He shall not die. And he swore an oath. I promise you, you will live because what you're saying is what I need to hear from God. And then David's on his deathbed. Like he's fixing to see God any time now. And he brings his advisor over and he says, remember that Shimei guy? Kill him. So he puts a hit out on the guy he promised before God and everybody not to kill. So he's just getting twisted, he's getting broken, things are going down badly. And we don't like to preach that because it's really easy to preach glorious King David, and you too can be a David, and Goliath, and they're doing the Sunday school lesson. That's awesome, but that's not reality and that's not the whole story. And so how do we engage grace? How do we engage faithfulness beyond the broken channels through which all of us will receive grace? You see, David shifts his disposition towards Mephibosheth. So he's doing all these other things. His heart's getting hard, it's turning. And so when he gets back from hooking and jabbing with Absalom, Ziba comes out. Now, when I was reading that stuff about Ziba, did you think that was setting up a problem? The king said, you were Saul's steward. You were the number 2. You're like the advisor, the consigliere, to the mafia don. But instead, I got a better plan. This cripple guy that you despise, he's going to be your boss. All of your children, all of your servants are going to now be enslaved working his land so that he can eat choice food at my table. And you're going to provide for his family. And now you're number 985,000 in the kingdom. Go to it. So Ziba had a bit of an axe to grind. So he runs out and he meets David. We're going to find this story, 2 Samuel 16 and 2 Samuel 19 for the resolution, if you want to read about it later. And he runs out and he says, man, that Mephibosheth, when you were gone, he was trying to take the kingdom from you. Remember that whole Saul thing? He was playing on that card, and I stopped it. So I alone care for you. And this Mephibosheth guy, I told you, he was trouble from the beginning. God cursed him for a reason. You didn't listen. And he totally lied. And so David took all the rightful lands of Mephibosheth from Saul, and he gave them to Ziba. He could do that as the king. Totally wrong. Mephibosheth finally makes it out. And David asked him, why didn't you come out to meet me? And Mephibosheth's like, you put me in an awkward situation. You are the king, and you did completely restore my life. But I'm lame. That's why I didn't come out to greet you. Of course I didn't come out and greet you. Why would you think there was any other reason? Well, Ziba just told me what a scheming weasel you were. And so Mephibosheth said, look, I've not shaved my beard. I've not changed my clothes. I've not washed. I've not eaten since you've been away. I've been heartsick over you. I just care about your welfare. That's all I care about. And so David says, okay, how about you just divide the lands up? I don't care, whatever. So he gave half the lands back to him. So he still rips them off. Here's Mephibosheth's response in 2 Samuel 19:30. Mephibosheth said to the king, let him take everything now that my lord the king has returned home safely. He doesn't care about the money. He doesn't care about the power. He doesn't care about the loss thereof, because his identity has so changed. And because he's able to see himself as one of the king's kids, as deserving to be at the table, as truly being the end of shame because somebody else has ended his shame, that changed everything to where now he could see David as he was and love him anyway. And it wasn't just as long as David was being perfect God to him and showing this perfect, better version of himself and everything's hunky-dory, he was good with it. But even when the circumstances changed and it was unfair and it was ugly and it was petty and it was selfish and short-sighted and the opposite of everything that David had initially been to him, even though that happened and it was a raw deal, Mephibosheth so had a different version of himself. That unmerited favor had allowed him to grow into the fullness of the image of God and the measure of the man that he was made to be. None of this other stuff really mattered. It was just a scaffolding to help him to appreciate how precious he was to God and how that played out in his life. This is the world in which we live. That the actual people through whom we will receive the grace of God, through whom we will receive mercy. Grace is getting what you don't deserve. Mercy is not getting what you do deserve. And both of those are bound up in the character of God. And so we, as God's followers, we mediate those to a lost and broken world. But none of us are going to do that perfectly. And let me flip it around. The people through whom which we have received grace or mercy or not, or a counterfeit version thereof, or a contingent version thereof, or whatnot, all the lower levels where we play games and it's all infected, if you will. That's how we have received grace. That's how it's been modeled to us, and it's imperfect, because that's the imperfect world in which we live. Why is there an ending to the story the way it is? Because that's the way a lot of stories end, because we're broken and we're fallen and we're still in process. And there's no happily ever after in this life. Now, we're getting set up to an amazing happily ever after where the words don't even do justice, but we are not there yet. During this time where there is still sin and death and Satan is the prince of this world and we on a rescue mission, our experience of this grace is going to be affected. Lots of people have been hurt by church. In fact, the reason most people aren't in church is because they had not a bad experience from the world, not a horrible life setback, all this happens, but it's because somehow they were disappointed, they were betrayed, they were let down, they were hurt by the very people that should have been doing the exact opposite. And I've been guilty of that. I've been on the receiving end, I've been on the giving end. So my biggest regrets are that the letter of the law versus the spirit of the law and hurting people in that. Really, I've done some incredibly stupid things in my life, but the things I really regret are those transactions. You couldn't be more right and wrong at the same time. And those are our experiences where we've been hurt. We have skewed views of God because of skewed people. Family and friends, you only hurt the ones you love. Yeah, some of the biggest or deepest or longest standing or the longest shadows that we carry are being hurt from our own family, our caregivers, the people that should have modeled security and trust and grace and love and belief and all these things for various reasons just didn't or did worse. And then that negative tape of self-criticism that's playing. You know, Satan doesn't have to double down on this. I don't know, I figure Satan's just doing the backup hype person on a rap track. You know, like my thing is like, Bill, you suck, you're a hypocrite, you're a liar, you're a fraud, people are going to find out, you got to be afraid. And Satan's just back there going, liar, afraid, suck, Bill. That's all he's got to do, because I'm filling the rest. He doesn't even have to. I'm doing such a better job than Satan. He doesn't need to change the narrative. He's like, whoa, dude, that's brutal. I'd never say that. Wow. So I make Satan blush with my internal narrative. But we have this narrative because you see behind the eyes and you see the motivation, and I know the guilt, and I'm accustomed to shame, and I traffic it, and I smoke it every day, and this is just the air I breathe. And God has given me a new narrative, and God has given me a new story, and God has pronounced healing and wholeness and grace and peace. God has put me at the table where I could eat intimately with the king's kids. And so to what extent can I allow Christ to make himself at home in my life, my attitudes, my values, my time, my money, my relationships, my body, myself, everything about me, to allow him to do that, to discover the depth of his love, counterbalanced between grace when it's eked out, grace when it's deflected and refracted, and beyond that, the true grace of God. But that's not the whole story. Just like we can say all this stuff in my life and I see it's true, it is not the whole story and it's not the true story. When I'm in the bowels of my depression, it's like I'm in a huge valley, super narrow, and all I see is a ribbon of blue and nothing else. And so I can look at the ribbon of blue and say, okay, this is where I suck and I fail and I'm down, and all these things are true. And all those things are true. Don't tell a depressed person that what they're seeing isn't true. It's true. The problem is it's only 3% of the story. And I lose the other 97%, and I lose the but God, and I lose all of this. And so in that sense of that's all there is, this is how this is best fleshed out. I'm going to close with this verse, show you what I mean. Titus 2:11. For the grace of God has appeared that offers salvation to all people. It teaches us to say no to ungodliness and worldly passions, to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in this present age while we wait for the blessed appearance of Christ Jesus. And basically, Titus is pastoring a church in Crete, and he's saying, man, I got a hard tour here. I don't know what to do with these people. They're crazy. And so Paul quoted something, yeah, everybody knows they're evil beasts and party animals. It's true. But that doesn't excuse the need of what you need to do. But he's saying, Titus, don't make the mistake of riding them hard. Don't make the mistake of breaking them over the head with the law, and you sin here and you fail here, and you got to stop doing this, and you got to stop doing that, and you got to be more like that. The law and calling people out is all it's going to do is force people underground. Okay? Holy Spirit convicts. We don't. But where the grace shows, and we're given a completely different vision of ourselves, a completely different version of ourselves, a God vision, reflecting of seeing, man, the image of God and the hope and the grace and how much God loves us, then we don't want to be doing these things that are going to separate and rebuild the walls and hurt and divide anymore. We want to be present. We want to be available. We want to be at the King's table. Let's pray. Father, I thank you for the mercy and the grace that you've shown each of us. And counterbalanced against the narrative that we develop for ourselves and how we see ourselves and how we're justified at hiding and punching out and taking the pack off because it's too scary. But God is our greatest hope. Our fears, our liabilities, they may be true, but everything changes in you. You have removed our sin. You've removed our shame. You've removed our guilt. You're making us whole from our brokenness. And I pray, Father, that we could see our true reality as being a kid at the King's table. Your willing identification with us, your provision for us, your fear not being spoken over us. And despite all the imperfect channels and ways and means we received grace from others, that we would see more and more behind that as the perfect grace of a perfect loving Father, of a much bigger plan and a much bigger heart, that grace being the umbrella under which we can fail and we can fall down and feel your hands gently but firmly standing us up, that we can take another step or fall forward yet again. And we can discover with the rest of the saints the full dimensions of your love as we wrestle with somebody who is probably most unlovable to us. And we discover in the bargain that we're most lovable to you. May we go and do likewise in Christ's name. Amen.